Good evening. As officials in states from New York to California pulled Tylenol capsules off shelves today, the company that manufactures the drug took its own action. Johnson & Johnson is now offering a $100,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of those responsible for spiking Tylenol capsules with deadly cyanide poisoning.
In the early morning hours of September 29, 1982, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman complained to her parents of a sore throat and a runny nose. Thinking Mary might be developing a cold, they gave her one capsule of extra-strength Tylenol and sent her back to bed. In American pharmaceuticals, Tylenol is an over-the-counter drug that reduces fever as well as other aches and pains. It is most commonly used to alleviate symptoms of colds and flu, so Mary's parents administering their daughter a capsule was nothing new. After Mary had returned to her bedroom, Mary's father Dennis heard her get up and go to the bathroom. Seconds later, he heard a loud thud as if something had dropped. Growing concerned, he hurried to the bathroom and called for Mary. After no response, he opened the bathroom door to find his daughter unresponsive on the floor. When first responders arrived, paramedics tried desperately to resuscitate Mary but were unable to save her. A few hours later, she was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. News spread quickly of her death in Elk Grove Village, a small suburb outside of the city of Chicago, Illinois. However, no one knew what could have caused Mary's death, as the only drug she had taken was Tylenol, which was widely used across the country.
That same day, in a neighboring Chicago suburb, 27-year-old Adam Janus, a local postal worker, decided to stay home from work after experiencing minor chest pains. After picking up his two kids from a nearby preschool, Adam stopped and purchased a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol before returning home. After having some lunch, Adam told his family that he was going to take 2 Tylenol and lie down. It was only minutes later that Adam came staggering back into the kitchen and collapsed. First responders that arrived at the Janus house were unable to resuscitate him, as his heart would not restart. Initially, medics thought his collapse was most likely cardiac-related, but explained to Adam's wife, parents, and siblings that they were unsure of what caused it. Adam was rushed to the emergency room, where they were unable to save him, and he was pronounced dead. Stricken with grief from the day, Adam's entire family remained at his house to offer his wife and children support. His younger brother Stanley, 25, and his new wife Teresa, 19, went into Adam's medicine cabinet and took some extra-strength Tylenol to relieve the headaches they had developed from the trauma they had faced. Minutes later, Stanley collapsed after going outside to smoke a cigarette with another family member. His wife Teresa collapsed as well. Stanley was pronounced dead once paramedics arrived, but Teresa fell into a coma before eventually dying shortly after her husband. Because officials were unsure as to what was causing the sudden deaths in the family, they were isolated in a hospital as Adam's house was tested for carbon monoxide poisoning. Investigators were beginning to grow more suspicious of what happened at the Janus residence, as Stanley and Teresa were both people in good health that died in the same way as Adam. One detective noticed that there were 6 capsules of Tylenol missing from the bottle and 3 people dead. Not knowing what else might have caused their deaths, he took the bottle with him for testing.
Meanwhile, in Winfield, Illinois, 27-year-old Mary Lynn Reiner was not feeling well after giving birth to her 4th child a week earlier. She took some Tylenol but minutes later collapsed on the floor. She was found by her husband, who had come home not long after she had fallen. But after being rushed to the hospital, Mary Lynn was pronounced dead the following morning. 9 miles away in Lombard, 31-year-old Mary McFarland complained of a headache to her co-workers at the Illinois Bell store. She excused herself and went into the back room to take a Tylenol, but collapsed minutes later. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. Nurse Jensen came forward and urged Dr. Kim, a medical examiner, to look into the bottles of Tylenol that had been taken from the crime scene. Initially, Nurse Jensen was waved off, but investigators were growing desperate. They decided to compare the bottles of Tylenol that had been taken from the house of Adam Janus and 12-year-old Mary Kellerman, the first victim. Upon inspection, investigators realized that the capsules smelled strongly of almonds, leading them to believe that the pills had been laced with cyanide.
Cyanide is a chemical asphyxiant that blocks oxygen from the red blood cells. Someone that ingests cyanide ends up dying from asphyxiation, as their blood cells cannot absorb oxygen from the lungs. The resulting effects are usually cardiac arrest and brain damage, and in some extreme circumstances, death. When Dr. Kim received the lab reports from the Tylenol capsules, he found there to be 100 to 1,000 times the amount of cyanide that was necessary to kill each individual in each pill. Investigators believed that someone must have tampered with the Tylenol bottles and placed cyanide inside the capsules. During the 1980s, Tylenol bottles came in small cardboard boxes. Besides a child-proof cap, there was no plastic seal on the bottle, and the only thing inside with the pills was a cotton ball. This made it extremely easy for someone to tamper with the contents of the bottle, as there was no way to indicate the bottle had been opened previously. Additionally, Tylenol dosages came in a capsule form that could be opened to reveal powder in the center. The capsule could be opened up and additional contents could be added before being reassembled, making it extremely easy for someone to slip cyanide into a capsule of Tylenol.
On the morning of September 30th, an attorney for Johnson & Johnson, the company that owned Tylenol, arrived at Dr. Kim's office. After being briefed on the probable connection between the mysterious deaths in the Chicago area and the medication, Johnson & Johnson advised the public to not take any Tylenol if they had it. Later that day, the company issued a recall for Tylenol bottles from lot MC 2880, as all of the bottles linked with the mysterious deaths had come from the same lot. Johnson & Johnson, as well as the investigators working on the case, were hopeful that the spread of information about the recall would prevent any further deaths from happening. Unfortunately, the final victim of the contaminated Tylenol had passed away the previous day on September 29th, but wasn't discovered until the night of October 1st. 35-year-old flight attendant Paula Prince purchased a bottle of Tylenol at a nearby Walgreens after a flight from Las Vegas to Chicago. As she was getting ready for bed, Paula took a Tylenol to help alleviate the cold symptoms she was beginning to feel. It wasn't long after she took the Tylenol that Paula collapsed on the floor. After not showing up to her sisters for dinner on October 1st, Paula's sister called the police to do a welfare check. They discovered Paula's body on the floor of her bedroom with an open bottle of Tylenol on the bathroom counter. Investigators were able to obtain surveillance footage of Paula purchasing the bottle of Tylenol at Walgreens on September 29th. However, they are unable to identify if someone had placed the tampered bottle of Tylenol on the shelf, as there were no cameras in the aisles. That night, the mayor of Chicago announced that the city would be pulling all bottles of Tylenol off the shelves after additional contaminated lots were found, 1,910 MD and 1,801 MA. A contaminated bottle was also found in a drugstore in Schwamberg. Investigators were now tasked with trying to figure out who had tampered with the bottles and how they had done it. The only evidence the investigators had was that the capsules had been laced with potassium cyanide and were placed on the shelves approximately 36 hours before the first death. But with no further evidence, there were no suspects or leads that would indicate what happened. A few days later, on October 5th, a 27-year-old man named Greg Blagg went to the hospital in Oroville, California. He had taken a capsule of extra-strength Tylenol before starting to feel ill. It was discovered that the capsule had been laced with strychnine, a strong poison. Thankfully, Greg recovered at the hospital. The bottle of Tylenol he had brought was traced to a drugstore where 3 additional bottles had been tampered with. However, no ties were found between the bottles laced with strychnine and the Chicago deaths. Instead, it was believed that a copycat killer had tried to replicate what happened in Chicago. To increase precautions and the chance of additional copycat crimes, Johnson & Johnson went a step further and decided to recall all bottles of Tylenol around the United States, costing the company an estimated $100 million. They also declared they would no longer manufacture extra-strength Tylenol in capsule form.
After investigation, the FDA tested over 1 million bottles of extra-strength Tylenol. They found no Tylenol bottles contaminated with cyanide outside of the Chicago area. Legislature regarding the safety of over-the-counter medicine quickly rolled out, requiring plastic seals on the outside of the bottle and inside the cap. Labels on things from orange juice to medicine all had the same warning label on it. Do not use if seal has been removed or tampered with. But with all of these necessary precautions continuing to roll out, further evidence soon ran dry, and investigators were unable to come up with a single suspect in the murders. In the initial days following the poisonings, investigators received hundreds of calls with leads. However, none of them went very far. Whoever it was had been smart about tampering with the capsules. However, on October 6th, a letter arrived at Johnson & Johnson, claiming to be the person behind the Tylenol murders. They demanded $1 million to ensure no more people would die. The letter was quickly handed over to authorities, who tracked it down to a New York man named James Lewis. Despite the letter claiming he was the killer, investigation found that he was never in Chicago during the time of the murders. He later served 13 years in prison for extortion. With the trail running cold again, investigators wondered what the motive behind the killings were. If they were trying to target one person, it could have been any of the victims who had died, or someone who was still alive and had avoided death due to the fast spread of information. It was more likely that the killer wanted to poison as many victims as possible, much less with a specific person in mind.
The accepted belief was that someone had purchased the bottles of Tylenol, tampered them with cyanide, and then placed the bottles in different locations around Chicago. Additionally, someone at a Johnson & Johnson center might have tampered with the bottles because they were angry with the company and wanted to ruin their reputation. As they began to draw suspects, all of them were cleared or ended up being dead ends. A few weeks after the poisonings, a woman turned in a bottle of Tylenol laced with cyanide, claiming to be the wife of DuPage County Judge. But when investigators tried to follow up with the wife of the judge, she had not been the one to turn in the bottle. The woman who had turned it in had given police a fake name, and investigators were never able to locate her. Another suspect was Roger Arnold, a DIY chemist who was also a dockhand at a Jewel Foods warehouse. He was later cleared of any involvement in the crimes, but garnered a lot of unwanted media attention. 2 years later, he shot a man named John Stanisha at point-blank range. Roger mistook John to be Marty Sinclair, a man he believed was behind the unwanted media attention. He was later convicted of second-degree murder and served half of a 30-year sentence. In the years following the initial Tylenol poisonings, additional copycat killers began to emerge. In 1986, 4 years after the Chicago murders, a 23-year-old woman named Diane Ellsworth died minutes after taking 2 capsules of extra-strength Tylenol in Peekskill, New York. She was staying at her boyfriend's parents' home at the time. There were 2 more bottles of Tylenol that had been laced with cyanide found in the same drugstore Diane's boyfriend had bought the Tylenol from. The killer was never identified. Later that same year, 2 more people died in Washington after taking Excedrin that had been laced with cyanide. However, this time the killer was found to be the wife of one of the 2 victims named Stella Nickel. She was sentenced to 80 years in prison for tampering with the pills. In 1993, a man named Joseph Melling tried to kill his wife by lacing Sudafed capsules with cyanide. Instead, he accidentally killed 2 strangers and was sentenced to life in prison. The initial Tylenol poisonings and the copycat attacks that followed caused companies to transition from capsules to pills. The capsules were easily opened up, with the powdered contents easily tampered with. The solid pills were much harder to tamper with without someone noticing.
The culprit of the Tylenol murders that occurred in 1982 has yet to be found. The FBI has kept the case open, despite there being no suspects or leads. The motive was most likely that someone decided to tamper with the capsules to gain attention and cause harm. However, no one knows for sure who made the choice to lace the capsules or why they did it.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. For notifications of any channel updates, hit the notification bell. We hoped you enjoyed this video and we'll see you next time.